Can you hear them? Can you hear the whispers of the ancestors? We remember. Their stories are in these walls, in our bones, in the air that we breathe. Their stories are in the touch of a calloused hand, in the melody of songs that we hum while washing dishes, in remembered faces. We hear the whispers of the ancestors, how their stories touch our lives and call us into becoming. It comes from a book of meditations called Bless the Imperfect by Kathleen Montgomery, or edited by Kathleen Montgomery. You are mosaic makers, practitioners of justice, called to respond to brokenness in the world, restoring beauty by joining in solidarity with the least of these, the poor, the undocumented, the wrongly persecuted because of sex or gender identity or race. You, mosaic makers, practitioners of justice, will minister to each other, for this ministry needs your energy, your passion, your hands in order to thrive. It needs your wildly beating heart to animate its spirit. Being mosaic makers isn't easy. The pieces can be so tiny. It's difficult to see the whole picture. You always have to risk making a mistake and needing to undo. You will have moments of dis-ease, of needing to apologize, make amends, restore your covenant. You will have moments of fatigue. Share leadership. Invite others to share this vision and co-create with you. You, mosaic makers, practitioners of justice, your work is an act of gratitude for those who came before and for that which is yet to be. How blessed you are. How blessed we are to be in this together. We met Don and Karen when they first started coming here to the Unitarian Church. Stephen and I had been here I'd been here for 3 or 4 years, and Stephen had been here for maybe 1 or 2, and it just has been one of the greatest blessings of my life to have that friendship grow and last and mature, and our kids grow up together. And I have to say that Don and Karen have both inspired me through all of that time. And so I'm delighted to introduce Don Morrison.
Thank you, Janice. And the sentiments of both Karen and I are mutual. I'm going to have some remarks, and I'll talk as fast as I possibly can, so that we'll have some time for more reflections of people. This really is reflections that I remember, and so I do want to get through this quickly so we can other folks can share other where you sat during the 90s and or what you've heard since you've been here new. Well, in 1990, Karen and I had a 1.5-year-old son who's now going to be 30 this year. And in 1990, I had a lot of hair on top of my head. Really, I did. Betty Mills was writing a regular column, bringing much needed common sense to the Bismarck Tribune's editorial page. And in 1997, Ursula Conrad, at age 70, joined the Peace Corps and went to Nepal. Well, the historian in me thought I'd just go to my files and I'd find all sorts of good things and it'd be easy to figure out what to say. Not so much. My filing wasn't quite as good as I'd hoped. But I did find some nuggets, and I also found some more in the archives here at the UU. And yesterday I got blissfully lost in the past for several hours. So where to start? 1990, the #1 pop song on the charts was... Seems embarrassed to be there. Anybody know? What? Yes. Another Day in Paradise by Phil Collins. And since today is Super Bowl Sunday, I have to do a little bit about that. It's entirely fitting to say that in 1990, the Super Bowl, the San Francisco 49ers defeated the Denver Broncos 55-10. During that time, during the decade of the 90s, the Buffalo Bills were in 4 Super Bowls. They didn't win any, but they were in 4 Super Bowls. The Broncos 3 and the Dallas Cowboys 3. When the 1990s began, George Bush the first was president, and then Bill Clinton was elected in 1992 for the rest of the decade. Looking out this window here, across the street at the state capitol, the Democratic NPL had elected 13 of the 16 statewide offices. Only 3, 13-3. And that included 3 of 3 North Dakota seats in the U.S. Congress, plus a majority in the North Dakota State Senate. Kent Conrad, who grew up in this fellowship with Betty Mills as his Sunday school teacher, was in his 4th year as a U.S. Senator. It was in many, many ways very, very different world. Janice Chaney was a key staff person in Governor George Sinner's office, and I was working as the assistant to the state tax commissioner, who at that time was Heidi Heitkamp. In 1990, the Bismarck Mandan Unitarian Universalist Fellowship was 2.5 years after our first full-time minister. That relationship lasted 1 year and was a bad experience that we have talked about many times in the years following. And all of that has recently been wiped away. In 1990, 1991, our programs included talks on aging, depression, I went too fast, environmental thinking in our national park system, feminist readers theater, the Easter brunch with trombone solo by Ryan Conrad and a violin solo by Gretchen Lyon, Indian Nations at Risk by Cheryl Coulis, Betty Mills speaking about what does it matter, what we believe, Kathleen Norris. How many people remember Kathleen Norris? She wrote a book on North Dakota spirituality, and she gave several talks here. One was on the fundamentalist within. Other topics were, is military spending worth the sacrifice? Meeting the goddess within, AIDS on the prairie, and talks by visiting ministers. By the end of the decade, 1998-99, a sampling of the programs were You Have a Voice, Make It Heard by Shelley Seberg from the labor movement. Merle Boucher, who was by that time a minority leader of the North Dakota House of Representatives. We asked him to talk about social change in the legislature. Well, he got off topic, as Merle sometimes might have. He gave a wonderful and memorable talk about his values, which really ended up being a view of a Catholic who had some really strong UU values. Thinking of Ralph Waldo Emerson and UU theologians and other American political thinkers, we might call those values that Merle talked about American values. Debbie Rogers, who brought her harp and gave us a talk on a Celtic gift. Sexuality by Lola Huey, who helped us lead our welcoming congregation effort. Lola's daughter is a lesbian, and Lola became known as Mama Lola to the movement in Bismarck, Mandan, and North Dakota. UU Heretical History. It was a video shown on Thanksgiving one year. Dean Conrad talked about globalization. Ursula Conrad talked about her time in Nepal, and we heard from refugees from Kosovo. We had some programs on religious topics. such as Larry Spears and Joanne Spears, who were the leaders of the Friends, who were meeting here as they do today. Joanne was a biblical scholar, and I remember one of my, she gave some really in-depth analysis of the Bible from her perspective. I remember one of the first talks that I gave here, and I started with, you know, so many of our talks here, but certainly not all of them, are very reasonable, rational, intellectual, out here, you know. And I said, hang on, folks, because I'm going to bring feeling into this morning, values, emotions, who we are as people, and what drives us to be and do what we are is not necessarily based on just the facts, man. Now, look at where we are. With a choir, young people with us, and we seem to be feeling every Sunday. Mostly in a thoughtful way, of course. In the early 1990s, we enjoyed the friendships and discussions. We had circle suppers where we got to know each other, and we're continually glad that we had found this place. And a place where we could be who we were. We didn't have to translate anything. We could actually talk with someone we might disagree with on something, and it was a good experience. Popular but labor-intensive fundraisers included the sauté sales at the Capitol Fair in August and the Bismarck Street Fair in September, but we also had a service auction where we bid on things like babysitting. Remember Molly Brooks? Well, Karen and I, that was a bid by her parents to have her come and babysit. Legal services from Sherry Millsmore. Carpentry work by Janelle Cole, or hauling big things in Janelle's big pickup truck. Dinners from different places in the world, and I remember many of these dinners at Pat and Dean Conrad's, and several Ethiopian dinners that Karen and I had at our house. In the 1990s, Sunday school responsibilities transferred from Sherry Millsmore and Jean Richardson to Steve Crane, Janice Cheney, Don and Karen Morrison, Mary Mitchell, and Carol Jean Larson. And I often shared duties at that time with Steve Crane. And I must say, he was amazing with our young people. It was. The man has the required amount of patience for doing that work. I was in awe. We went to a day-long workshop in Grand Forks on UU curriculum with folks from Fargo, Grand Forks, and Bemidji. And several months ago, this is a new thought, several months ago, Betty Mills and Joyce Conrad talked about how important our children are in why we come here, many of us. And this just seems to be a continuing thread, decade after decade. And I have great admiration and understanding for the teachers who are with our children now and who have been in the past. During the 1990s, the polarization of our state and country was in full swing. Far-right political and religious groups and funders were pouring time and resources into reversing human rights, labor, economic gains of the past 75 years. Meanwhile, progressives, and don't take me wrong, but progressives were in retreat. We were working our butts off, though, but generally speaking, looking across the country, there was retreat. In 1994, the Republicans took over the House of Representatives in Congress for the first time in 50 years, and in North Dakota, similar changes were at work as our state officials became more concerned with corporations and less concerned with ordinary people. In our congregation, our social justice and social action work was mostly done by people here who worked in other ways in other organizations. It was still important to us, however, because this congregation had always been a social justice, social action place from the very beginning, I think we could say. And Betty Mills, and I always put this into every talk I do, is that had coined the phrase, we were the little church with the big mouth. Well, members here were major leaders in founding the North Dakota Progressive Coalition in 1992. But our Social Action Committee work was not very active in the beginning part of the decade. Our values and our sense of who our heritage was still there, but we were stretched way too far and too much. The UUA, meanwhile, passed resolutions supporting universal health care, children caught in immigration disputes, and environmental justice. Well, in September 1996, Stefan Johansson, from UU minister from Winnipeg, facilitated a growth workshop here, and based on UU principles, particularly the belief in the worth and dignity of every human being, our fellowship identified as one of our purposes a more tolerant and accepting community, and that the way to achieve that was for our fellowship to have a greater presence in the community. Well, then along came Susan Baker. Susan Baker got that Social Action Committee moving again. She got a grant from the UUA, and we launched on to the Dismantling Racism. Now, along the way, she participated in a Fargo UU anti-racism workshop, and the grant fund she got was over $10,000. So we reached out in this. We didn't do this alone, but we reached out to others in our community who shared our concerns, and we needed to connect with them. Susan wrote letters, made phone calls, contacted the United Church of Christ, the First Presbyterian Church, the St. Mary's Catholic Church, McCabe Methodist, and they all quickly agreed to work with us. The Friends and the Episcopal ministries at United Tribes soon joined the steering committee, and we began our efforts. Later, the Religion and Labor Committee of the North Dakota AFL-CIO joined, as well as the Bismarck Hebrew congregation. Some of the things that we did was McCabe Methodists launched this with sponsoring a workshop with the head of their denomination's national anti-racism effort. 50 people came, and the local media gave us wonderful coverage on the front page. That's one thing that happened throughout this whole Dismantling Racism, was the coverage by the newspapers and the media was really, really good. St. Mary sponsored a family fun festival. We thought we got to have fun together as well as thinking. We sponsored a Crossroads workshop at United Tribes and Crossroads was an educational and training organization that taught us about dismantling racism. It was a 3-day session. It was an incredible experience. And that really helped us move forward and do more activities. And this really was launching in 1998, 1999. By 2000 or so, we had done a lot of things together. It was really good. But we're having some differences of opinion about where to go within this with the other churches. And to make it really brief, is some of the group said, we really need to dismantle racism without making anybody feel uncomfortable. Perpetrators of racism, we got to be careful, then they're really important. We got to make sure they feel comfortable. And some of the rest of the group, you can imagine who we were, said, that doesn't make any sense. That we should start with folks. There's 100,000 people in North Dakota that are in the middle, and we should move forward. And so those efforts did kind of disappear, but they come back, and the relationships and the connections are still there, and we do work together. Now I'm going to go real briefly over the welcoming congregation. We did lots of thinking, lots of doing. We had 18 months of workshops, and I do have the questionnaire. One of my favorite things was a questionnaire that we all took And every single person, almost, I think, was what's in my notes anyway, is that in the congregation came to at least one of these 18 workshops. So it was a really a deep experience for all of us. And some of the questions that we started with beforehand was, two people of the same gender give each other a quick kiss hello. How would you feel? How about if they were male and female? Someone asks you where you go to church. You tell them. She responds with, oh, isn't that where all the gay people go? What would you say? So remember, this was 1999. And we passed with flying colors. We got on a scale of 1 to 5. We all got 5s on every question, pretty much. Then we got into the discussions. Not so much. It was really healthy and really a good exercises of really understanding and talking through. People came from different places in their perspectives, and by the end, the board in 2000, June of 2000, voted to become a welcoming congregation. And I did want to do one shout out that it really helps call us to action in many different ways. And Jim and Barb Lennington helped lead the effort during that time for the Missouri Valley YMCA to change their definition of a family so that same gender households would be considered a family for membership. A lot of what came out of our discussions was really coming together as a community and realizing that we can do things together as a group, as an organization, as this is who we are. We talked a lot, we worked up through a whole bunch, and then we came and agreed that that's who we wanted to be. And so now, of course, the rainbow there, the flag here means something to us as who we are. It also means things to people who are in solidarity with us when they walk in our place. So we do many things together as a group, as well as otherwise, but not everybody agrees with everything. And we find our way and our place together with agreeing with some, but not necessarily with all. So that was one of the things I think that was a real big change, or a movement, or a sense, was more togetherness as when we go out into the community. But what also struck me as I did all this was how much things change, they stay the same. New people, old people, stepping up and making it all happen. December 1999. Smooth by Santana. Thank you.
Our closing words are from Leslie Takahashi in the volume Lifting Our Voices. Here in this place of peace, may we find hope. Here in this place of connection, may we find life-giving community. Here in this place of rest, let the unrest in our hearts turn us toward justice. Here in this space, made sacred by memories of connection, let us each feel ourselves part of the new that grows from the old in the spiraling unity of years.